Welcome to this session of Writing More, Grading Less. My name is Teresa Rogers. I am a technical literacy consultant with the Office of Career and Technical Education and Student Transition. Over the course of my teaching years, I have taught health sciences, special education, working with students with reading and writing, and I've spent the last 8 years with the Department of Education working on standards and literacy and career and technical education. In this presentation, we will compare the different types of writing and we'll talk about how that influences the grading practices for each. We'll discuss the practice and benefit of guiding students through a writing assignment one step at a time, and we will explore strategies to decrease the grading time and hopefully increase student engagement in the writing process. I want to take a minute to look at this NCTE resolution on grading student writing. Several years ago, the National Councils of Teachers of English came together to discuss the issue of student writing, which we all know is a very difficult process. How do you assign a grade to a piece of writing? We use rubrics and we try to be as objective as possible, but it's difficult. On top of that, once students see their grade, there's really not much growth in their writing as a result of that. So they feel that it's better that as much as possible that we refrain from using grades to evaluate the student writing, and instead that we conference with them, we provide feedback through the writing process as opposed to trying to do that at the end. We can spend forever on providing comments, but students, once that grade has been assigned, they don't pay much attention to it. I want to talk about the three types of writing because these really influence how that we grade the different types of writing. So the first that we'll look at is writing to learn. This is not a formal composition by any means. It's usually just a single draft, and it's really an instructional tool to promote learning and deepen the student's understanding of the topic. Examples can include learning logs or journals that you may use in your classroom, professional notebooks, bell work activities, entrance and exit slips, those types of things. Writing to demonstrate learning, this is writing that's done in response to a school exercise, a question or a prompt or a teacher assignment, and it's intended to help the teacher assess the student's learning and their ability to complete a task. You'll recognize these examples as it may be an answer to an extended response prompt, an answer to a test question, summary of a reading or an activity that they've done, or maybe an explanation or an analysis of a process or some content or a text that a student has read. Writing for publication is typically what we think about when we think about student writing, because these are pieces that are taken through that formal writing process. It's written with a specific, authentic purpose. We have to pay attention to the needs of the reader, and it's always done in a real-world form. And it's intended to help students develop their skills in communication and promote their learning and thinking. So some of the examples that you may find, it really depends on your content area because text differs in different program areas. But this may include reports or proposals or case studies, brochures, pamphlets, a speech or a podcast. It can include emails, websites, infographics, and diagrams can also be considered under this type of writing. But we're going to look at the grading practices for each of these as we go through this presentation. When we think about writing to learn, remember that is that draft writing. Just students don't go back and correct the writing. But this can be your learning logs, just an entrance and exit slip, that type of thing. So this should be writing that students are doing every day. Writing, we can become fluent writers just as we can become fluent in a foreign language. Writing for most of us is not a natural skill or something that we even enjoy, but we know that in the workplace it is crucial to a student success. So think of how you use writing to learn in your classroom and think about what you do to give a grade or credit for that. A lot of teachers use some type of learning log. These can become quite cumbersome, and because of that, a lot of teachers, we just choose not to do it. But the benefit for the student is really, really big. So find something that would work for you. What kind of system? Would it be a notebook that students would keep that you'll look at once a week, every other week, once a grading period? These do not have to be graded every day. And you may ask, if I don't give a grade every day or at least once a week, how do I know that my students are going to do it? It really goes with classroom expectations. If you choose to use a learning log, you're not going to put the assignment on the board and never return to it. But instead, if you put an assignment up, something every day that students will write a sentence or two about concerning the content or what they've done in class that day, you're always going to go back and review that. It's just a short, quick bringing the class together, either at the start of class or the end of class, and take a couple examples or allow a couple students to share. Or maybe you're just walking around, roaming through the classroom as students are writing. The grade for that typically is just going to be a completion. Either it's done or it's not done. So a simple rubric, something like I have here, that once, whatever your timeline is, once every 2 weeks, once a grading period, you take that journal, you just flip through the pages. If you see a lot of missing pieces or incomplete work, then you just score that down because of that. You also want to be careful about having everything due at the same time. So when you think of student writing, and especially grading that, consider how that you can focus on one class 1 week, another class another week. So it does not have to be done at the end of that grading period, just sometime once during a grading period. Typically is pretty manageable. And I have even let students grade their own. I'll give them a checklist, they go through, and I'm roaming around and watching to see what they do. And you know your students, if you have a class that you can't let do that, then certainly you'll do it yourself. But in our CTE classes, we typically will have students for multiple different courses. So if you make this a consistent practice through your classes, this really is a fairly workable system. Writing to demonstrate learning, what we're looking for here is the accuracy of the content. Because it's done in response to something a student has read or we're testing them on. So we want a very, very simple rubric, and we're really looking at the accuracy of the information. Did they answer all parts of the question, and is it accurate? We also know when we're grading open response questions, some students give a very in-depth answer to that. So think about what the minimum expectation is and just set that as your expectation and then score it from there. These are typically scored pretty quickly because it's apparent either the student understands the information or they don't. And we usually do not score this for writing conventions, anything along that lines other than accuracy of the content. Writing for publication is what we're going to spend the rest of this presentation on, because this is typically what we think of when we think about scoring student writing. So these are pieces that are taking through the complete writing process, and these do require a good chunk of instructional time as well as time for grading. And I would never assign more than one of these in a CTE classroom. Now, in an English classroom, yes, but for our CTE classrooms, the writing will support the content, but we don't want to take away from other pieces that we need to cover as well. So there's two ways that you can approach these assignments. The first is grading the assignment, or the second is giving and guiding the assignment. It's going to take about the same amount of time, but student learning and student outcomes will be much better if we focus on the second, the giving and guiding. So a typical writing assignment, this is how I used to do everything. I would give the assignment. I would tell them, write a report about a disease. The guidance that I gave them was it needs to be about 2 pages long. Maybe it would typewritten or something else. And I would tell them, make sure you use correct grammar and spelling. And then I would get the papers back, and I would spend hours writing comments, trying to point out all the mistakes that they needed to have, that they shouldn't have made, in the hopes that when they do another report for me, that it would be a well-written, well-organized, lots of detail, correct grammar, all of those things would be improved. But there was really no incentive and certainly no opportunity for the student to address those comments that I gave once I had graded that assignment. So it was frustrating for me. Students weren't learning how to write in health sciences or in the medical field. So it really was a futile effort on all of our parts. However, as I learned more about writing and lots of opportunity to talk with other professionals, I found that there was a much better way to do a writing assignment, and it really went with front-loading that assignment. The outcomes of that student writing was leaps and bounds above those first years of writing assignments that I gave. So what we're going to talk about is how that we can spend more time on the front end, and that grading is going to be very quick. I mean, you'll just be amazed at how quickly it changes things. But it does take more work on the beginning end. So the giving at this, with this type of writing assignment, I'm going to set expectations. I'm going to show examples of the finished product. I'm going to show my students right up front, this is what I expect. If I get something similar to this, you're going to get an A on this assignment. For a lot of students, that's motivation enough. Is, I can almost guarantee that you're going to get an A or at least a B on this if you work with me on this assignment. I share the rubric or the scoring guide. I make sure that students know what I'm talking about when I say focus on the audience. What do I mean by details? What do I mean by conventions and grammar and spelling? And then I also need to share the timeline of the assignment. The guiding is going to be time spent on working on manageable chunks, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But I'm going to look at each chunk of writing that the student has done. So maybe I start with writing the introduction, and students, I'm looking at each of their introductions, and I'm giving feedback on that chunk. And I'm always going to give credit for that. It may be as a homework grade, it may be as a daily grade. That's not going to be weighted as heavily as that final grade, but we need to provide that incentive for students, and typically that's going to be credit for the assignment. The grading of this, you can see that it's a very narrow column, but students will turn in all of those chunks as well as their final product so that I can see that they have applied those comments and things that we've talked about. I've already seen their work before. I know what each student is doing, and all I have to do is a quick scan really through the writing to see how that they've made those improvements. I'm not going to do any comments at this stage, and I'm simply looking to see if students are using those suggestions that we talked about. Now, the timeline for this may be a little bit longer than the other version that we did, because I'm probably going to use a week for each of the chunks. You can work on a faster timeline if you want, but I just don't like to rush those things, and so consider what your timeline might look like. So when I think about giving the task, giving the assignment, I want to make sure that the students know who their audience is, because if they're writing for younger students, their writing is going to sound a lot different than it does if they're writing for other professionals within the field that understands the language. What is their purpose or the content? Is their purpose to argue that some medical procedure is ethical? Is it to inform a patient who's just been diagnosed as a diabetic, how that they can manage those? Or what's the purpose that they're going to use? And then make sure that they understand the product. Is this going to be a proposal that they're writing? Is it going to be a health information pamphlet? Or is it just going to be a general academic report? So below here, I've shared an example of a task just that includes all of these so that students would understand these and know where they're going. So after researching the disease you chose, write a health information pamphlet to inform a patient about the disease and its treatment. So you can fill in your content, your program area, any way that you would need to change this, but it really sets the student up to really focus on the type of writing that this needs to be. And then again, the timeline or a schedule of how the work will be completed. If students are new to your class and they've not worked with you before, then let them know. We're going to write the introduction this week. We're going to research something next week, and let them know how that this process will work. Be sure to let them know that there'll be credit for each of those chunks as you work through it. So once I've given the assignment, I'd like to share examples of what that assignment looks like. In career and technical education, we have unlimited forms of writing that we can expose our students to, topics that will really grab their interest. And it does not have to be a strict academic report. We have so many visuals and schematics and flowcharts and tables and graphs. Think about what would work best for your students. Think about students, a sophomore class is going to work a lot different than your capstone courses or your seniors. But share an example. You may have to write the piece yourself up front, but what I did is I will save really good student examples Of course, you'll take the names off, and I'll provide those for students as examples or models of this is what an A paper looks like. The scoring guide, I choose something very simple. I used to go with all the performance descriptors, but I would spend hours trying to decide, is this a 3 or a 4 for purpose? Is this a 2 or a 3 for details? And it just really became cumbersome. So those are fine and wonderful, but this is what works best for me. I'm still addressing under the meets expectations. I'm still addressing those main traits of writing. The first thing, they address the prompt appropriately. They have a clear, steady focus. They use relevant information from credible resources. They use enough detail to meet the needs of that particular audience. They use an appropriate organizational structure, and the information flows the way that supports a reader. There's very few errors in punctuation and grammar or spelling. The language and tone should be appropriate to the audience and purpose. And if you're having students cite the sources, then they use the appropriate format. So this is the rubric that I like to use because I can go through, and if a student has one spelling error, maybe I'll mark it down 1 point. If they've got multiple, maybe I feel it needs to be marked down 10 points. But this is easier for me to use than the ones that have the performance descriptor, but it is really whatever works best for you. Occasionally, I have students that, not occasionally, in every class, there's going to be students who go above and beyond in their writing, and I hate not to give them extra points for that. So I've got a column here that if they just have awesome details and no mistakes whatsoever, then I can give them 5, 10 extra points for that assignment. When we get to the guiding part, consider what that writing product is. What's the best way to chunk it into pieces? Essays and reports can pretty well go into an introduction and a body and a conclusion. I love to do health information pamphlets or case studies with my students. So, there's going to be an introduction. There's going to be a huge section on the disease. What are the statistics? How is it diagnosed? The prognosis, all of those things. But there needs to be a reason for that purpose, for that pamphlet. So I always have my students consider what the patient, how they're going to use that information. How do they manage their disease or condition? You may be writing a project proposal. What's the description of the project? What are the objectives? What are the costs? What's going to be the return on this project as well as the benefits? So think about an authentic piece of text that is, relevant to your program area. How can you chunk that up for the students so that you can give them some guidance and feedback through the writing process? Along with that chunking process, the sections that really have the meat of the information, you may need a little bit more guidance for that. Students typically can write a fairly good introduction, a fairly good conclusions that can engage the reader and set the tone of the paper. But a lot of times in our CTE content areas, they need specific guidance on that content area. And then too, we have the internet that we're doing our research, and we know how easy it is for students to copy and paste chunks of information into their paper, and we want to avoid that at all cost. So typically in health sciences, for me at least, students are always writing about some condition. So I'll use something similar to this organizer that's helping them to find key pieces of information that they're going to need to know for that paper. I have them handwrite this out in their own words, and this is what I'm looking at in this guiding part of the assignment. It assures that they have enough detail, and it assures that they are putting it in their own words. And another part that you can't see on here is I have them, as they're doing this, I have them list the sources where they got this information from. This is very easy for me to look at and say the student is looking at congenital heart disease, and I can look here very quickly and say, oh, they've got the accurate information. They don't have anything to tell me how it's diagnosed. They've not told me the different forms of the condition, if there are some. So this is a very quick way for me to follow along and check on their progress. As I'm looking through this, another thing that I do is, as they turn in a section, say they have turned in their introduction, and I'm going to give feedback on it. So some things that we want to, that will help us as teachers as well as help them to become better writers. We don't want to correct their mistakes. We just point them out. So you can see here that I've just underlined the first line. You can circle the word that's misspelled. I usually just underline the line, and it's up to them to find it. You can just use an abbreviation, SP. That's pretty clear for spelling. But a lot of teachers like to use a comment key with just numbers, and they'll post that up in their room, and so they'll just go down with numbers. I tend to forget the numbers, so I tend to just do the abbreviation. But in the second comment that you see here that states, when the heart beats faster than normal, it is called bradycardia. And we know that that is incorrect, and it's called tachycardia. So if I use the key, I just use the number. But if I'm writing the comments, I might just put a check mark and facts, check facts, or inaccurate, something like that. But it's not very time consuming to be able to look at the section and to do this. I'm just pointing out mistakes, and then I don't have to translate that into a grade on the rubric. So this helps the student to go back, learn that, okay, how do I spell arrhythmia? What's the correct spelling, or what's the correct fact? So it is a benefit for the student as well. And then once I get to the grading score, students will submit all of the work with the final piece. I will not take the paper unless they turn in those chunks. They know that up front. And if I'm doing it online, which I do quite a bit, everything there is in that Google Doc for them. So at this point, all that I'm doing is looking to see if they have taken the feedback that I've given them and applied it. So in this score here, maybe the student, they did not take that feedback that I told them that they needed more details, more information, and so I marked them down 5 points. Maybe there were several, they didn't go back and correct spelling and punctuation and those types of things. So that final grade is really quick to do. So some key takeaways for this presentation. It's been a lot of information, and finding writing assignments that fit your content area and your classroom management style, it does take some time to refine that practice. But a few things to remember is that everything does not need to be graded. If it's writing to learn, I'm just giving students time to build that fluency, to use the terms and the vocabulary within my content area, to build their skills for communicating. If it's writing to demonstrate learning, I'm only grading the content because I want to know, can they explain this topic or this problem for me? And then when I do decide to take a piece through the writing for publication phase, then that's going to be a whole different type of grading. So the type of writing determines the grading criteria. Writing to learn is really just completion. They're practicing building that writing skill. Writing to demonstrate learning, they're learning the content. And writing for publication, they're learning to write as well as building their content knowledge. And then most importantly, when we think about writing for publication, is that guiding students through the writing process will improve student learning, both content learning and literacy skills, reading and writing, and it will make grading a much easier task, and you'll get such better writing products. Some resources that will be included with this presentation, I've included a sample of bell work, a couple different samples that I've used over the years, and then there's some resources for you as a teacher. There is a document called Composition in the Classroom, and it talks more about the 3 types of writing. So there's a lot of good information in there that I think you'll find useful. I've put that single column scoring rubric, but there are a host of scoring rubrics, and it's all up to your preference. I have put a technical text list in there where always as teacher, I don't want to assign a report over and over and over. I get tired of reading them, and so I know students get tired of writing. And as I said, in CTE, we have lots of different ways that we communicate with other professionals in our field. And then I have a document that's called Writing That Works, and it has a lot of different information about different types of writing, how to set students up for success, and a lot of tips and things that I think that you'll find useful. If you have any questions or comments, please reach out to me at teresa.rogers@education.ky.gov. I'm happy to talk to you if you come across problems that you're encountering with student writing, and we can maybe problem solve those together. So thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day, and good luck in your new school year. And thank you.